I want to bring up another special guest who's going to be inviting another very special person. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Tanya Dunn-Pierce.
Fanboying so hard he forgot that I was the next person along here, but that's okay. We understand, Neil. So before I begin, I'd like to invite the health support workers and the survivors involved in the honoring ceremony to make their way to the chairs that are right to the left there. Karen's going to help you move your way along there while I'm doing the introduction. Okay? So, not many people rising, but they'll make their way over there. So my name is Tanya Dunn-Pierce. It has been one of my greatest honors to have been part of organizing the Wet'suwet'en gatherings these past 8 years. To have learned from those within our community and those on similar paths from other communities, from our committee members and our cultural guides, and from residential school survivors themselves. As an administrator with the Saskatoon Health Region and then the Saskatchewan Health Authority, it was clear to me and to our organization that inequity exists. The TRC calls to action reflect not just unequal outcomes in health, but also injustice, child welfare, education, all of which are connected to healthy people and healthy communities. What we do as a health system matters. We can't just react. We need to be proactive, critically examining and changing our structures and policies. We need to be part of solutions that start with seeing people as whole persons, breaking open spaces for Indigenous peoples, voices, and leadership, and modeling the employment of traditional and contemporary approaches and perspectives. This is Wet'suwet'en. And the Saskatchewan Health Authority, notably the Departments of Population Health and First Nations and Métis Health are back there as well, are proud partners and supporters. Today, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce a woman who is an expert in humanizing systems and helping people to heal from policies intended to dehumanize. Brenda Reynolds, and I was looking for her over here, so I think she's probably over there helping out. But Brenda Reynolds has been a part of the Wet'suwet'en conference since the beginning. Oh, there she is. Sorry, Brenda. As a presenter, she's been here, and as a participant being here, modeling her wise, caring, and supportive approaches throughout. Brenda is Saulteaux and grew up on Fishing Lake First Nation. After completing her Bachelor of Indian Social Work, she worked at Gordon's Indian Residential School providing counseling services and educating students about abuse. In 1992, Brenda was recognized for her commitment to children by the Alberta Foster Parent Association, receiving the Social Worker of the Year award. More recently, her contribution to the advancement of health education, specifically on the history and health impacts of Indian residential schools and Indian hospitals, was recognized when she was named as the recipient of the 2019 Alberta Medical Association Medal of Honor, which recognizes a non-physician who has made an outstanding personal contribution to the people of that province. Brenda is one of 3 nominees for the 2022 Canadian Medical Association Owen Adams Award of Honor. This award is the highest honor given to a person outside the medical profession and recognizes contributions to the advancement of health education and awareness that bring change to the healthcare system. Brenda continues to provide consulting services related to the impacts of Indian residential schools, and I know these will be very relevant to her presentation today. This is entitled, Bearing Witness, the Indian Residential School Health Supports, and our guests to the left here are a very important part of that as well. So please join me in welcoming Brenda Reynolds to the stage.
Thank you, Tanya, for that introduction. And hello to everyone that's here today. And thank you for the prayers that were said this morning. And I'm always so happy to be to be in Saskatoon. It feels like home. I lived here for during my university days when I was going to when I was doing my undergrad in social work, and also too is that one of the reasons I've been attending the conference is 2 of the 4 people that brought the idea and gave birth to this idea of this conference. Two of those friends are my 2 sons, my oldest son Ashley and my middle son Neil. And so I've attended as a participant, but more as a mother, a supporting mom, and a supporting proud mom who I've seen my kids grow and to be doing amazing work. And to be gifted with this tobacco is really, really special for one reason. One of the things that I made sure that we had lots of when we were doing our work as the health support program was to have tobacco and offer tobacco. And I saw a tobacco pouch like this in a box, and I called the number that's on there. And at that time, they didn't have their email address on the box. And I called because I wanted to place an order. Because this tobacco is sacred tobacco, it's organic, and it's grown specifically for ceremony. And I placed an order, and seconds after I placed the order, I got a phone call from one of the ladies, and she goes, "Are you sure that you had enough zeros in your order?" And I said, "Yes." I said, it is right. And I said, we offer tobacco on behalf of former students who aren't aware of the protocol requirement to give tobacco. And I said, so we always use tobacco. And she goes, there's only 2 of us. We're 2 teachers that are starting this business. And she goes, we can't grow that much tobacco of how much it was that I had ordered. I ordered $10,000 worth of tobacco. So it was a lot of tobacco for those 2 ladies. And since then, those ladies, the tobacco followed us right through the whole TRC and right for my 7 years that I was with the health support program. So this tobacco is really, really special. So today I was invited to come and speak on the development and the program of the Indian Resolution Health Support Program. And I'm very, very happy to see some familiar faces to my side here, and it always makes me very happy and proud to recognize some faces that provide the health supports throughout the settlement agreement, and they are actually the bearers of witness, and the bearers of witness at a level that is so where they witness so much trauma. And when I was asked to develop a health support program that is under the settlement agreement, one of the principles in the settlement agreement was for Canada to have a health support program, and we know all the other principles in the settlement agreement, which is the common experience, the independent assessment process, the truth and reconciliation and commemoration, and health supports was one of those. And back in 2007, September 2007, when the settlement agreement was being implemented, I went to Health Canada and I ran into, he was the Regional Director General of Health Canada at the time in Alberta. And he said, Brenda, he said, I've been thinking of you, and he said, I'm so happy to see you here. We're at an elevator. And he said, I just came back from a meeting in Ottawa, and he said, we need your help. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. We've been court-ordered to develop a health support program, and we don't know what to do. We don't know what that's going to look like. He said, we need your help. And he said, would you do it? And he said, no, never mind, would you do it? He said, I want you to do it. You have to do it for us, he said. And I said, you realize that it's going to be really costly. And he said, never mind, we were sued. We have to do it. And I said, we have to do it in a way where we have to consider the more than 150 years of trauma that we have experienced as Indigenous people. And so we agreed to meet to in a couple days to see how this was, what this was going to look like, what this program was going to look like. And so in the settlement agreement, what it says is that Health Canada is supposed to be providing emotional support for emotional safety for former students and their families. And so what that says to me, what that means to me, was that we were going to be working with years and years and generations of trauma and the residential school students at the time, and this was back in 2007. And when trauma happens, when you experience trauma, and the kind of trauma that we're talking about here is that I see it in two different ways. I see trauma where people experience trauma like a car accident or a natural disaster or an illness that just like cancer, something like that, that happens that is out of our control. We have no control over what it is that happens to us, and our challenges to cope with it is really, really challenging. But the kind of trauma that this relates to, and how I see it, is the trauma related to oppression. That trauma related to oppression are the aggressive assimilation policies that were developed by Canada. One of those policies was to remove the children from their homes, from their families, from their culture, from their community, and place them into residential schools. And so trauma related to oppression is systemic trauma. And part of that is the Indian residential school experience, the day schools, the child welfare, and it goes on, many, many other traumas like that. And so when that happens is that the health support program is specifically related to trauma. And another thing that I wanted to make sure was included as a part of the health support program was to have former students, as they were going through the settlement agreement, for them to make informed decisions of how it is that they can participate in the settlement agreement. Because remember, trauma, like what I just said a few minutes ago, is that it happens and you're out of control. And this time, the former students, I wanted them to have the information of how it was that they were going to participate within the settlement agreement, and for them to make that decision based on information and how it is that they can make their own decisions on how to participate in the settlement agreement process. And the other component of the program was also to have it strengths-based. And when you're experiencing trauma related to oppression, it isn't related on your own strength. It's related to there's the we're better than you attitude. And there's nothing equal at all about it. And so the strengths base came from the emotional support on how we can be the best people it is that we can be and understand and provide emotional support throughout the process. And so I started this in September of 2007 when the settlement agreement happened. But at that time, we didn't know the number of former Indian residential school students. And in November of that year, there were 80,000 of former students that had received their common experience. And that number helped me figure out the enormity of the support it is that we had to provide to former students. And so the next thing I did is, after I found out the number of former students, is I contacted Common Experience Secretariat, the secretariat that was delivering the Common Experience. I wanted to know where the postal codes were. The highest numbers of people that had received their Common Experience, I wanted to know where they were, which pockets they were living in. And so I did that, is found out where the former students were, but I also wanted to make sure that it was inclusive to all former students. It wasn't only former students living on reserve, and it wasn't only former students living in urban centers, but also to those former students who are in homeless situations and who are incarcerated, and Métis students as well. And so I started going to different communities and saying is that they will receive funding for the health support program, and that I would provide training and provide all the coordination that is required for the work it is that we had to do. And so that was how I got my numbers. And the program that I developed was based on 3 different kinds of helpers. And for me, I say helpers because I grew up on a reserve, and I grew up on Fishing Lake, and I was very, very fortunate that I grew up being a part of the traditional community, and where there is ceremony that was present all the time, and our family extended to another reserve, which was Yellow Quill. That's where my little Cookham came from. And I also heard the helpers that help out in ceremony. And so I've always felt like a helper. And so these 3 helpers that are in the program, one is the Resolution Health Support Worker, who are community-based, and they get to know all the communities and what resources are available in the community, what referrals is it that they can do, and they are the first line of the bearing of witness. And then the second one is the cultural support workers. The reason why I call them cultural support workers is because, to me, I have seen 2 distinct cultural support. One is a ceremonial person who knows the different ceremonies that people attend and get healing from. Another is the more the traditional counseling and will point you right in the right direction. And so and then the other thing is that I also saw was that cultural support for the healers, that they started learning on these different ceremonies when they were little kids, when they were or young people. They didn't necessarily start when they're older. And so it's that lifetime of learning that they learned to provide and to be a practitioner of ceremony. And so that's why you see cultural support and not elder. And it had nothing to do with being disrespectful to elders, but I wanted something very specific, and that was the ceremonial people to help. Because when you're working with trauma, I heard many, many times before from various friends who are practitioners of how when people are experiencing trauma, that disassociation that happens and where your spirit leaves you, that there's ceremony to bring the spirit back and to reconnect and do some healing. Those are the practitioners that I wanted. Those healers are the ones that I wanted. And then, of course, the professional counseling. I'm a professional therapist, and so I see the value of Western therapy as well, and wanted to blend all that group of helpers to walk alongside the former students and their families as they're going through the settlement agreement. And so the workers. Some of the workers that you see here in the early days, and when we first started, we had up to 800 resolution health support workers across Canada, from coast to coast. And some of them were former students, and some of them were intergenerationally impacted as well. And we had some Métis, and we also had a very few non-Indigenous workers as well. And it was hard to get the few non-Indigenous workers involved, and I wanted to do that for a few reasons. One is reconciliation. We cannot go through this alone. We need allies. We need people that understand what trauma it is that we went through, and if they don't understand, we're not going to make that collective growth towards post-traumatic growth and into wellness. And also, in Alberta, I was a contracted regional coordinator to do this, do this work, the development and support the resolution health support workers as we went through the settlement agreement. Because I used to, as a coordinator, I used to get information at where the former students were, and they would call me for different questions and that kind of stuff. In Alberta, the northwest corner of Alberta, we also had the highest number of non-Indigenous former students. And the former students that were non-Indigenous called, and that they lived and they experienced similar experiences to other students that were in the residential schools. And we had the highest number collected in Northwest Alberta, and that was they were placed in there because of either being orphans or they didn't have any schools nearby, and that their parents didn't have enough money to send them off to school, and so that they were placed into residential schools. And so that was our team that made up the team where the former students intergenerationally impacted, and of course some non-Indigenous, and we had some Métis. And their personal wellness was a priority, because you cannot work and be a support person if you don't have your own level of wellness. You can't be a support and help someone else along if you can't look after yourself. So it was very, very important right from the very, very beginning that I made the personal wellness a priority. And then next thing was to have no judgment, to be accepting people for where they are at, and where, not only emotionally, mentally, but where they are in terms of living. And to listen and to witness truth all the time. And many times, as we started the settlement agreement process, especially in the common experience, was that many times it was the very first time that former students were sharing their truth. And someone was listening to them, actually listening to them with attention, and who was actively witnessing what it was that they had experienced. And so sometimes these home visits, these visits that would happen in the beginning, they would last for hours and hours, 4 or 5 hours at a time, because the former students didn't have that kind of attention before, where somebody actually listened to them, because they were ashamed of their experiences, and they felt guilty for their experiences. Many times that they thought that they were the only ones that had experienced the amount of abuse and trauma that they had experienced going to residential school. And so it was, thanks. So we worked with that trauma. And when I had that initial meeting with Herman, was the Regional Director General in Alberta at the time, I said the way that I want to have the health supports is that we have to have monthly training. I have to be providing them ongoing monthly training on trauma. What does that look like? And how are we going to deal with it, and how are we going to address it in a safe way to make sure that former students and their families were receiving the best emotional support it is that we could provide. And then also too is that because the settlement agreement, it was new, it was the first time that anything like this had happened in Canada, is that there are many, many changes. Not only was I developing the program as we were going along in the settlement agreement, but the ones that were delivering the settlement agreement were going through the same process as well. And so there was a lot of learning that went on, that I had to make sure that I understood the settlement agreement was on top of all the changes that were happening all the time. And it was important to include this as a part of the training on an ongoing basis. And once we got kind of established and were going well on our way into the common experience, is that we started community engagement sessions. And those community engagement sessions was to provide information to former students so that they know how to participate in the settlement agreement, so that they can make informed decisions. And the settlement agreement I made sure that all the former students attended our community engagement sessions, is that they were able to understand the legalese in that agreement. I translated that settlement agreement into a grade 3 language. The reason I say that it was a grade 3 language is because all the former students, the older former students that I met, said that they went to school and stayed in school until they were 18, until they were 16, but only received a grade 3 education, because they were busy working all the time. And that was the only education was that they received. So I wanted to make sure that they understood what it was that they were getting into and what their rights were. And when they were getting the compensation, is that we also provided training to them on wills. So it wasn't only providing emotional support to them, we gave them all kinds of information so that they knew what it was that they were getting into, what their rights were. They were the ones that hired the lawyers, and the lawyers were working for them. Because many times, especially through the common experiences, that lawyers would go to former students and say, you need a lawyer to go through the common experience. And no, you didn't need a lawyer to go through the common experience. So we really, really tried to do our best to educate the former students as they're going through the settlement agreement. And then the other thing that I did through the monthly training was to provide mentorship. The health support workers that were hired in each of the communities and came to do the work, is that every single one of them said that they've received all kinds of training, whether it was on suicide intervention, whether it was on crisis intervention, and in different areas in mental health, but they didn't know how to apply that to the communities it was that they were working in. And so I made sure that the training that I provided was applicable and that they knew how to do it. And so that was how I did the mentorship. I did it as a group, but we did it together, and then I would provide that mentorship individually between the periods that we would have our next training. And then the other thing that we did was peer support. Every month when we got together, we would provide an update of what activities that we did in our communities, and if they worked, then those activities would be duplicated in other communities as well. And it wasn't this typical syndrome where you bring people down and you put people down. It was nothing like that at all. It was lifting each other up by recognizing the strengths of the people that were doing the health support work, recognizing their strengths and being a mentor to each other and to be a peer support to each other. And so we developed this atmosphere, and it wasn't only an atmosphere, but it was this group feeling of being a member of a family and saying I love you to each other and hugging each other. I had never ever felt that in a workplace before. But we got to be really, really close with each other, because the health support program had never been done before, like anywhere. When I was asked to develop this, I did some research to see if there were any other models that I could look at and adapt into the Indigenous communities, and there wasn't anything. And I did that for months and months on end, in between training sessions and between community engagement sessions. I was always looking for research to see what it was that I could adapt. And there was absolutely nothing, so it was always ongoing. And the other thing was that I included in the monthly training was also self-care. Because when you're working with trauma, you have to look after yourself. Because if you can't look after yourself, you're not going to be able to withhold and withstand the amount of trauma it is that you're going to be working with. And so we did self-care activities and different ways it is that you look after yourself every month. And of course, we also talked about personal wellness as well. Some of the challenges and transitions and some of the successes I didn't put on there were some of the former students Some of the health supports for former students and intergenerationally impacted, and every single one of them would get into situations where they would get triggered. And part of the training was, how can you manage your own triggers and still be a support to someone when they're sitting right there? So it was teaching them on how to respond, but also to put that on hold until you've left your session with the former student. You had to learn how to manage your own triggers, because some of the former students, as we're going through the settlement agreement, is especially through the independent assessment process, some of the ones that they would have been assigned to would have been their perpetrators, because student-on-student abuse under the independent assessment process was abuse that was related to either physical abuse or sexual abuse that happened in the residential school, students on student. And sometimes I would receive the information for a hearing, and I was going to assign it. They would see the referral and say, I can't provide support to this because I know that he or she is my perpetrator, and I am not in a position yet to provide support to my perpetrator. And then I would reassign that hearing to someone else. But in the meantime, I would work with them so that they could learn how to be safe and how to grow from their own experience, whether it was sexual abuse or physical abuse from their perpetrators, because that was something that we came across a number of times. And through the independent assessment process, we were able to manage that because we knew where the perpetrators were when it came to student-on-student abuse. And by the time the Truth and Reconciliation Commission happened, the health support workers knew how to manage that kind of triggers, and were confident enough and far along in their healing that they knew how to do that. And under the common experience, some of the challenges were finding records. So it wasn't only providing emotional support, we were also filling in the gaps and filling in the demands that were made upon us. And I kept on hearing Health Canada on the side here saying, we're not supposed to be doing that. Yeah, we're not supposed to be doing it, but we have former students who are going through the process that need their records for them to verify that they attended residential school. And it shouldn't have been up to us to verify, because as a student, how many of us keep our school records? Not too many of us. And but we had to do it. Otherwise, there's deadlines in the settlement agreement. And if we didn't help the former students with their records and finding records, some of them would have missed those deadlines. I remember some of the former students here in Saskatchewan, the young ones that attended Lebret. There was many, many months that we went through and couldn't find any records for them that indicating that to support their application that they attended Lebret. I got a phone call one time from a man in Star Blanket, and he was a janitor there. He said, I found these boxes in the basement, and they are of records of kids that went to school in Lebret. And we were able to find, but that was through communication that we're doing this work, right? And so we were able to verify many, many students that attended Lebret by this man's work and opening the boxes and finding out and looking in there what were in those boxes, and it turned out to be that there were records. And so it was helping each other. And then some of the other challenges that we had were lawyers not admitting health support workers into the hearings. And yet that was their right as a former student to have a health support and to be supported emotionally through the process. There are some lawyers who are saying that this student is mine. You're not going to have access to that student. But we would find a way to get access to that student and provide emotional support to them. And then when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission happened, we went public. And why I say we went public is before the TRC happened is we provided emotional support in hearings And through the independent assessment process, those hearings would be in their homes, and a lot of times it was in boardrooms and hotels. And so it was in one room where we would have the focus on one student. And sometimes they'd bring their family members, but we would be able to provide support to them in a smaller area. When the Truth and Reconciliation, the second set of commissioners came along, we started having the national events, and where we would have public statements and private statements and hearings that led to the national events. And so what I mean is that we went public is that we had to provide emotional support to everybody in rooms like this at the Truth and Reconciliation national events. And when that started happening, one of the challenges that I received from Health Canada was that you could only provide emotional support to former students and their family members. So can you imagine like this in a room to say, oh, I see you crying and responding, but I can't provide support to you because you don't look like as if you're a treaty, or, like that you fall in the settlement agreement. And when Health Canada said that, I said, absolutely not are we going to do that. We're going to provide support to every single person in the room that needs it or asks for it. And so that was a very short conversation, and but one that had to be made, one that had to have happened. And then I talked about and then some of the other things that happened at community engagement sessions is the threats as health support workers that we received for sharing the information. When the common experience started happening, lots of awful, awful things were said to and about former students receiving compensation for the sexual abuse that they had endured. And some threats were made to us when we went to some of the communities. I remember being followed out of some of those halls and being called names and everything else, and just learning how to just not listen to any of that, and knowing where that comes from. And but we would share. We would make sure that we were safe when we left community engagement sessions, that we all left together as health supports, and we provided that safety to each other. I remember that we went to this one reserve in Alberta one time, and it was on a Monday morning, and I was unloading my vehicle, and when I got to the hall, I noticed that all these security guards were around outside this hall, and one of them came up to me and asked me what it was that I was doing and who I was and all that kind of stuff. And I told him why I was there. We were there to give information to former students. And I said to him, I don't think we need all this security. Like, these are generally older people, and I don't think we need that kind of security. And he said we had members of the KKK here this weekend that were looking for, they did beat up a man, but they were looking to rape a woman, and those members of the KKK were arrested, and they had court that Monday at 10 o'clock, and that's when it was that we were starting. And so there was this sense of fear that there was going to be some retaliation from the KKK. And I said to him, like, are you sure, like, that's the Ku Klux Klan? Or what is that KKK stand for, right? And I said, we're in Alberta, and we're, like, this is 2007, and, I didn't think that anything like that existed, but it did. And for 2 days, we had to be, as health supports, we had to be escorted out of that community. One of the health supports, her daughter went into labor, so she had to leave, and she called me a few minutes after she left, and she was being chased by trucks with men that had hoods on their faces or over their heads. And I had to call the RCMP to go and save her, to provide some escort services to her and into Calgary. So we had, in terms of providing emotional support, we also had to protect ourselves too from some of the harms that were being subjected and thrown our way as well. So we went through a lot, and like I had said before, we did form filling because of that service not being there. And another thing that we did is that we completed IAP, independent assessment process applications, closer to the deadline. And what happened was I received a call from a former student in Old Crow up in the Yukon. And he said, I've changed my mind. I want to go through the IAP process, but I don't have time to go get a lawyer. I don't know who it is that I would get for a lawyer. And what can you do to help me? And so I said, let me call you back. And I called IAP and I told them of the situation. And I said, can we fill out applications with just the bare minimum of information? Their name, their address, and the school that they went to, and their birth date. And can we do that? And they agreed to do that. And so it was advocating to do that, but oh my gosh, and then health support started doing that. We started becoming form fillers to go through the IAP process. And we worked like crazy to meet the deadline of that midnight when those applications had to be in. And then the thing is that if they didn't get their applications in there, they would have missed that opportunity for them to file for the IAP process. And so we did that. We always filled in the gaps more than what we were supposed to do for emotional support, but it needed to be done. We did it. Cultural support workers, I explained a bit about the ceremonial, the need for a ceremony, and we provided support where the cultural support workers provided support before the hearings and after the hearings, but during the hearings for prayers. And again, at the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we always had areas where we provided ceremonial support. And why I've got non-judgment accepting under the cultural support is that it was very, very difficult in the beginning to recruit cultural support. And the reason why that was is that I wanted to make sure whoever it was that we had as a cultural support worker had to be accepting, especially of the homeless. We had some people who were interested, but then there was some judgment of the people who are homeless, of being dirty and of being smelly and hungry and wanting to have smokes and that kind of stuff. But we had to have cultural supports that were going to be accepting of absolutely everybody. And if you were also providing cultural support as well as emotional support as the RHSWs, is that if someone was incarcerated and had murdered or had raped kids themselves and were incarcerated for it, we had to have people who were accepting of them and who weren't going to judge them, and were going to understand where the source of those behaviors were. The source of those behaviors came from the residential schools. And we had to accept the former students that were coming to us for help. Because if we are going to be judging them, we're not going to be there to provide the services it is that was required of us. So it was really important that we have people who were going to be accepting and not judging. And the reimbursement for cultural support wasn't at anywhere before for Health Canada for funding. And so I worked with people in Ottawa and within Alberta so that we can have cultural support providers recognized as workers, where we can give them a daily honorarium for the work it was that they were doing. And we had to make some changes within the Treasury Board guidelines to reflect that, and because that wasn't in the Treasury Board guidelines either too, but now it is. And we also had to adjust and submit applications to Treasury Board so that we can have tobacco and food covered. And because before that, Health Canada could not reimburse food or pay for food or fund food because of a previous minister that was in sitting had breached that and had taken a group of band members to a meeting in the Caribbean somewhere. And so we had to make some application and make some adjustments to appeal to the Treasury Board so that could be covered. Professional counseling. I provided training to therapists so that they were aware of the impacts of residential school and what that looked like, that looked like substance abuse and family violence and depression and all of those things within the scope of mental health, and all the things it is that we see as manifestations of the residential schools experiences. And then another thing that I also had to advocate to, I didn't have to, I advocated for, was to have the rates of therapists increased so that our former students and family members would have access to counseling. Because before it was, they would only get, Health Canada would only approve 10 to 12 sessions depending where you were in Canada. And I kept on saying is that we cannot heal anybody in 10 to 12 sessions for 150 years of harm. That's impossible. We cannot do that. And now there has to be an assessment every 3 months, a review assessment, but it's unlimited. And if former students are going to be receiving counseling, they have to identify as either former students or family members so that because it's another stream of counseling that is funded. And so yeah, so those were some of the things that I advocated for. Bearing witness. These incredible health support workers. I got to love and work so hard as we went across Canada. We provided support to 38,000 people that went through the independence assessment process. I cry when I think of the work it is that we have done. And we provided support to 80,000 former students that went through the Common Experience process. We provided support to 7,000 that went through the Truth and Reconciliation process, and thousands of others that went through the community engagement sessions. And the program now has been expanded to missing and murdered, unmarked burials, day school, and the 60s scoop. So the work of the health support workers are just absolutely incredible when they bear witness to the trauma of our past and of our existing times of child welfare, because there's so many kids that are in child welfare now than there were residential school students. But it's these incredible people that do that work, and we did that all throughout the settlement agreement. And another thing that I didn't say when we're doing the self-care is that we debriefed at the end of every single national event that we had, at the end of our day, all the time, is that we sat together in a circle and we talked about what it was that we experienced. And we would have teams of 10 to 15 at a table, but we would learn quite quickly on how to respond to the questions of how are you doing? What happened? Was there something that challenged you that during our work today? And if it was, what was it? And do you have any recommendations that could be made? And then we wanted for people to leave in a good way, and that last question was, how are you? Because we had to make sure that people left in a good way, that they were going to be emotionally safe. And those challenges that they had experienced during that particular shift, I would take back to the group and we would problem solve together on how we can make our program better for the next time it was that we came out. So we kept on getting better and better as we went along, and we started off at awesome, and we kept on going higher. And the emotional support was also before, during, and after. We, especially through the hearings, the IAP hearings and the TRC, is that we would prepare former students of how they were going to participate and how they were going to look after themselves and stay grounded in their hearings. And then, of course, we provided support during, and then we provided support afterwards. We went and checked up on them afterwards to see how they were doing. Were they still in a good place? And if they weren't in a good place, how can we provide support and refer them to each other and refer them to different other groups within the communities? And that was the program. I had the absolute awesome, incredible experience and gratitude for being able to develop that and work alongside of thousands of former students as we went across Canada. And it has been an amazing experience. My gratitude is, of course, the former students and their families. That's without saying. But I would not have been able to make the changes within government, within the government, if I did not have the support of some incredible people. The first one was Herman. Herman has now passed away. But if it weren't for his support and his belief in me, I would not have been able to do the work it is that I was able to do. He was amazing. And then I had some help within Alberta region and one of the other things that I had done before I started my work in mental health is I worked at Indian Affairs. So I understood agreements, I understood funding agreements. And if I didn't have key people within Alberta and within Ottawa, I would not have been able to fund all the organizations that hired and keeps the resolution health support workers employed. I wouldn't have been able to do that without their help. And I also had a couple of key people in Ottawa that helped me push the information, the questions, and the push to get things approved in Treasury Board. And this is reconciliation, is that you have to have some key people who are going to support you and believe you and do that work with you. Without them and without the resolution health support workers and in their change and their support, we wouldn't be where we are with this program if it weren't for all of those. And so I want to express my gratitude to all of them. And this program now, I started off in 2007 and it still exists 15 years later. So I'm really grateful that it still exists. But to the politicians that are here and to the people who are always advocating, contact your MPs, the politicians that are here, the chiefs that are here. Continue to push for this program, for the Resolution Health Support Program, to be funded all the time. Because now there's a review going on that it might not get funded at the end of this fiscal year. It was only supposed to be in place for the settlement agreement, but they keep on extending it, which has been really good. But we are not outside of our trauma yet. It needs to be funded. So that's my plea for those advocates and those politicians that are in the room. Jimmy Gwetch for the tobacco. Jimmy Gwetch for your time, and thank you to all the health support workers that are on the side here.